And welcome to my Bible study this week. As you can see, we're outdoors on my property. The weather is just so beautiful and so wonderful, and the glory of God is shining everywhere on this property right now. It's not too hot in Florida. The weather is in the 70s and low 80s. Everything is starting to come to life and everything is turning green. When I left to go south to my mom, everything was brown and dark, and now everything is coming to life and all the plants are growing, the trees are starting to bud, the birds are back, they're singing, you can hear them right here. So I thought that what would be a perfect timing, that we're coming to Easter soon and I'll be camping on Easter. So I have some things planned for that event. But it's such a nice day and it's wonderful. I know a lot of you don't have the luxury that I have to be in a place like this. So I thought I would warm you up a little bit today by bringing you some video of beautiful landscape and some peace and calm. And this is where I like to sit with God and write and read and study when it's this kind of weather. So this is actually my first time after coming back that I'm actually getting to sit here and enjoy the next maybe month or two where I'll be able to do this before it starts getting really hot, and then I won't be able to sit here. Maybe only in the afternoons. In the late afternoons I will. Another thing that I wanted to tell you was that God has also called me to do this ministry, and if he would have given me like all the steps at one time, I would have not done this. But right now I'm at the point in my life that God is bringing me to the point where I'm going to be doing Bible studies during my camping time with the girls when I travel with them. Some girls need prayer, some girls just need to hear the word, some girls just want to be with other women and hear the words. This is an important time for me because right now I have my microphone set up, and I know I've filmed videos before, but for some reason this makes me a little bit more edgy in filming because it's outdoors and I want it to be perfect. So today is actually my practice run. So let me know if you like it. Give me a thumbs up because God is bringing me to this place where I'm going to be doing outdoor Bible study. So I really got to get the camera angles done and well, and then I've got to be able to do the angles so the other girls are in the group. So this is kind of like going to be my first outdoor Bible study before I actually bring it out to do with some other girls. So if you like it, give me a thumbs up. Let me know what you think. And with that, let's get into our Bible study for this week. I had my hair up because it's windy and I don't want my hair in my face and in my book. I have my Bible here, my King James Bible that I brought with me that I do all my studies out of in here, and I love to color in this book. I have a link for you down below. But I have learned recently that when I'm outdoors, I have a lot of sticky notes and notes inside my Bible and they fly everywhere. So I have to have it on my iPad, which is what I've been doing. If you notice, when I went camping, it makes it a lot easier when I do my Bible study when I go camping to have all my notes in one place, because I have notes in there that don't fit all in the margins. So I have to put it inside like sticky notes, and then I get sticky notes from another place and another place, and then it's really hard to fit it into the verses. I have to color code a lot, which makes it hard because when you see me stop a video and then you see the next segment, it's because I had to cut it because now I'm looking for where is my notes on this and this and this. So it's, I cut all of that out. I edit. A lot of people don't edit their videos, but for me, I don't want you guys to waste your time sitting there. Let's get to today's video because we're going to do 7 and 8 today. I'm trying to project so that we actually do the Exodus Passover a week before Passover so that you understand it when you are going to Easter and Passover. So let's get to number 7 today, and we'll talk a little bit about last week. I'm going to read from my notes, where last week we ended with God and Moses in dispute, and Moses eventually applies himself to execute the commission that God commanded of him in obedience. This week, Moses is in service as God's prophet spokesman, and the Lord brings plagues and judgments on Egypt for the eventual leading of the release of the Israelites in the later chapters that we're going to read. Oh, and also I just want to mention that this week is going to be the contrast of God's power and how Pharaoh denies all of it. So that's going to be important. You're going to see a lot of that coming up. There's going to be conflict with Pharaoh in the next couple of verses, and we'll see that coming up. So let's get to verse number 1 of chapter 7 of Exodus. And the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet. Now, reading from my notes, God made Moses seem powerful in order to be deserving of being listened to. God has the power to make somebody look bigger and mightier than they are in the eyes of somebody else. Pharaoh was considered a god and recognized Moses as his peer, but he did not feel inferior to Moses at any time. So he felt that he could deal with them. You know, most people who are small, they just sent them away. They didn't want to deal with it. You know how royalty or people who are important are. They just don't want to deal with the little people. But this was God's work. Moses is eventually delivered from his fears as he is being strengthened in faith and proceeds in God's will through courage and perseverance. And we saw how God was bringing him, how he didn't want. He objected with God. He objected to doing all of this. He didn't want to be the spokesperson. A lot of people believe that he had a disability because he had a speech impediment. So he didn't want to do this, but God has been slowly bringing him to what he needs to get done, to get the courage and the perseverance to do what God has called him to do. So he shall be the prophet means that he shall speak from God to Pharaoh as ambassador prophet, and Aaron is the spokesman prophet. We'll see that coming up in the next verse. So verse number 2 says, thou shalt speak all that I command thee, and Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh, that he send the children of Israel out of his land. Verse number 3, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. So in this verse, I just want to tell you that signs are miracles with credentials that prove a mission. That was what this whole thing about signs is. And wonders is really miracles, but brought in the way of punishment. These are called judgments. So, and you will see that coming up later on with Pharaoh. From my notes now, the reason that the book of Exodus tells us there were eventually 10 plagues is because the number 10 has to do with the world government, and Egypt was representing the world, and the world would know that Egypt's gods are false gods to the surrounding nations. God glorifies himself to show that he is Jehovah by his performance and his promises to the Egyptians by pouring out his wrath on them. Moses is the ambassador of God who laid down commands on Pharaoh, threatening him and calling judgment on him, but Pharaoh was too prideful, but he could not resist Moses. And we're going to see that coming up in the next verses. Verse number 4, but Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt, and bring forth mine armies, and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. This part here where he's talking about bring forth mine armies, this represents that the nation was seen as organized armies with its different divisions, which were the tribes and God's military instruments. So these were God's people, and God was going to use them to make the covenant happen. But Pharaoh believed that these people belonged to him. So this is where the conflict is right here. Verse number 5, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch forth mine hand upon Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them. So in this part where God says that the Egyptians will know that he is the Lord, this is going to be a show that wasn't about saving Pharaoh or bringing him to God. It was about discrediting the representation of false gods, which is what Egypt was all about. Everybody believed in the gods that were there. They were going to see how Jehovah was the ultimate covenant God. They're going to see his supreme power, and they're going to exalt his name over all the earth, and to show the people that he is the Lord. Remember that Egypt represented the whole earth. It was one of the biggest empires in the entire earth. So whatever happened in Egypt was going to go out in the multitudes all over the world. And this is where God stepped up to make his name known and what he was going to do. Verse number 6, and Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded them. so did they. This means now that the reluctance and resistance of Moses stopped in order to do the will of God and be a faithful servant. Verse number 7, and Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 80 years old, when they spake unto Pharaoh. In verse number 7, when he says that he was 80 years old and Aaron was 83, that means that Moses was 80 when he was called by God, and Aaron was 83 years old. Remember, Aaron was an older brother of Moses. So it's important to note, I'm reading from my notes, that their ages were considered because of their experience, and they were now able to teach from wisdom. In the old days, when you were older, you were considered a wise person. Older people were respected back then to be wise and to pass down knowledge. So now he would be seen at this age like a person who would be respected when people heard from him. So as you can see, God can call you at any age to follow him, and you don't have to be 20 or 30. You can be 80, you can be 90. So when they come to Pharaoh, Pharaoh would know that these men were sent from God and that God was the Lord of the Hebrews. These men could not be acting on their own. I mean, these were like old guys, and they'd show up over to Pharaoh. So Pharaoh would know that this is not normal. This is not like some young guy trying to take over or try to make a new name. These were old guys. So imagine these are two old men. They were simple shepherds. In their clothing, they came to Pharaoh in their clothing. They had no weapons, no armor, nothing impressive about their appearance, standing before the all-powerful monarchy in his opulent palace, surrounded by armed guards and well-dressed attendants. Pharaoh couldn't be impressed with Moses or Aaron. When they came to Pharaoh, they had to solely trust in God, supernatural power, that Pharaoh was going to even talk to them. Verse number 8, and the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, verse number 9, when Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, shew a miracle for you, then thou shalt say unto Aaron, take thy rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent. Bear with me, because I'm learning that when I'm doing a Bible study and I'm sitting under a tree, because there's shade down here, that my lighting changes a lot. So I have to adapt to the video. So you see me looking a lot over here. It's not just to see if my video is still running, because trust me, I have done that where I've filmed like an hour-long video and then all of a sudden I look and it wasn't even recording. So tell me how that's pretty heartbreaking. So when you see me looking over a lot, it's because I'm constantly looking to make sure that I'm filming. But I'm learning from this that I also have to watch and make sure that my lighting is good. So hopefully my sound is good, because I did bring my microphone. Anyway, verse number 9, when Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, shew a miracle for you, then thou shalt say unto Aaron, take thy rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent. In my notes I wrote that God sends with his word proof of his divine authority. Those who are willing to disobey and object to God, he will permit to become ensnared in their own mess. Pharaoh is asking for them to show him a miracle, and remember, this is part of the judgment. Verse number 10, and Moses and Aaron went in unto Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. Now this meant that he was directly challenging and demeaning Pharaoh's authority. The cobra was a symbol of Pharaoh's power depicted on his crown. So what Aaron was doing was taking the symbol of the king's majesty and making it crawl in the dust. This was a direct assault on Pharaoh's sovereignty and on Egypt's belief system. There's a lot to these verses when you really start digging in for Bible studies and information further and further. There's so much that just opens your world when you really do a lot of research. Verse number 11, then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers. Now the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments. Magic and sorcery, from my notes, played a major role in the religion of Egypt, and the timing of serpents was one of them. These were known as enchantments. Whoops, Muffin's over here barking at Missy. Were known as enchantments, also witchcraft. The sorcerers The wise men and the magician demonstrated their abilities to perform similar feats by optical illusion and a sleight of hand. They learned physical manipulation. They were skillful enough to use for Pharaoh and his servants, but certain things only came from God, and they couldn't do it and had to confess their failures. Eventually, they're going to confess their failures, that they are not able to do the certain things that God could do. This was really big. This is why this city was so wicked, because they just, magicians and wizards and all of these types of people, they work on deception, deceiving the eye with optical illusions and trickeries and stuff like that. And they were really wicked back then. So magicians were cheaters who tried to copy the real miracle of God done through Moses. Through trickery or illusions were used, and satanic power from worshiping the underworld was their ultimate religion. They couldn't reverse God's power. They could only duplicate it. Verse number 12. For they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. So from my notes, I'm reading that remember back in the time of Joseph that these magicians would not have been really happy with the Hebrews, because remember, Joseph was able to interpret the dream of Pharaoh and his servants, and the sorcerers and the magicians that were there at the time. They couldn't figure it out, and Joseph was a Hebrew, and Joseph was in prison, and he figured it out. The Hebrews didn't have a good reputation with the sorcerers and the magicians because they were being put down. And this is what's happening right now. Aaron's rod basically gulped all the others with a simple shepherd's staff. Now, just imagine that for a second. Like this one staff, which now became one big cobra, just ate everybody's snake. Okay, so you can imagine their faces when he went gulp and he just ate all of them. That is so wonderful. Only God can do things like that. All right, verse number 13. And he hardened Pharaoh's heart, that he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. From my notes, anything that opposes pride and lust will not be easy to convince. And that was basically what they were all about in Egypt. Number 14. And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuseth to let the people go. Verse number 15. Get thee unto Pharaoh in the morning. Lo, he goeth out unto the water, and thou shalt stand by the river's brink against he come. And the rod which was turned to a serpent shalt thou take in thine hand. I'm reading from my notes that it is thought that Pharaoh would get up in the morning and go meditate on the river. It was kind of like the river was like their god. And he would go and pay homage to the river, which is one of the gods. There were several gods that they prayed to, so that was one of the ones. When God told him to go meet Pharaoh there, he's telling Moses, go and stand before your problem. Now he's moving Moses into a position of go, because now remember, all of this happened the day before. Now this is another day. Now he's coming back. He doesn't know what's going to happen, but now you're going to stand your ground in front of Pharaoh. And this wasn't going to be in the palace. This was going to be outdoors. And not only that, when he went out there and he was going to stand his ground in front of Pharaoh, he was going to show up with that rod. And when Pharaoh would look at him and say he's here with that rod, there would be a little bit of fear, a tinge of fear inside Pharaoh, because he knows what that rod could do. That was the rod that God sent with Moses. 16 now. And thou shalt say unto him, the Lord God of the Hebrews hath sent me unto thee, saying, let me go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, hereto thou wouldest not hear. Verse number 17. Thus saith the Lord, in this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will smite with the rod that is in mine hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. This should strike terror in the people when they start to see the streams of blood in the water. Remember that water is essential for all of life, and it was provided freely by God. But they believed that it was from their gods. This is what they believed. So now, at this point, the Egyptians were going to have to choose to drink the blood or die of thirst. Verse number 18. And the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loth to drink of the water of the river. So the dead fish, reading from my notes, and the blood also was going to make it putrid stench and was going to be very unpleasant in the city. Verse number 19, and the Lord spake unto Moses, say unto Aaron, take thy rod and stretch out thy hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. So pretty much everywhere, ponds, lakes, anything that was a pool of water, rivers, anything that contained water, a vessel of wood, a stone, anything that had water, there was also going to turn into blood. So now we know that the Egyptians idolized the Nile River, but now it was going to be stained with the blood of the Hebrew children murdered by Pharaoh's ordinance years ago. This is the significance of the water and the blood, because remember the ordinance that he had about killing all the Hebrew baby boys and throwing them in the river. This is the representation of the blood in the water. God's smite on the river would bring destruction also to their produce and to their economy. Remember, they were the biggest economy in the world, and this was going to hurt their economy. Verse number 20, and Moses and Aaron did so as the Lord commanded, and he lifted up the rod and smote the waters that were in the river in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, and all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. So all of this was done in the presence of Pharaoh and of his attendants as well. Verse number 21, and the fish that was in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. Verse 22, and the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened, neither did he hearken unto them as the Lord had said. The magicians tried to turn the river back to water, but they couldn't cast out the curse that God had put on them, because this only came from the divine power of God. As much as they tried, they couldn't turn this curse around. Verse 23, and Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither did he set his heart to this also. So he just totally walked away and ignored it. Verse 24, and all the Egyptians round about the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. From my notes, I wrote that the Nile River was heavily populated along its banks. It was a 3,000-mile waterway and considered the life source for the Egyptians. Most of the surrounding land was desert, but here there was farming, bathing, fishing, and drinking of its water. You could not survive without this. It was considered a sacred river. That's why they paid homage to it, and they prayed to the gods about the river. They really glorified this river. God was merciful. He probably had left some type of water for them to dig in the sand around the Nile River. This is why in this verse it says, and all the Egyptians digged around the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. So they were hopeful that there was still water in little pockets underneath the sand by the river that were still, and God could have provided that for some of them, for those that went looking for it. There are going to be people here that are going to see and start turning to God. Even if they're Egyptian, they're going to start to see the truth. Just like in society today, a lot of people are being awakened to what's going on and the corruption that there is out there. A lot of people want to deny it, but there's still people who really are starting to awaken. And at the same time, this could have been what's happening with the Egyptians. And these are the people who were asking to the God, who were turning to the God and saying, we're believing this God, you got to give us some water. I'll believe you. So there's an act of mercy right there that God could have given to some of these Egyptians that were believing in this one God, because they were seeing the miracles. Even though Pharaoh and his attendants had hardened their hearts, there were people that were starting to really see that, this was really a mighty God. Verse 25, and 7 days were fulfilled after that the Lord had smitten the river. For 7 days he was too proud, Pharaoh, to go to Moses and tell him to reverse the curse. Now let's go to chapter 8 of Exodus. And the Lord spake unto Moses, go unto Pharaoh, and say unto him, thus saith the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. Verse number 2, and if thou refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all thy borders with frogs. It's important to know what is going on here with this is the plague. This is considered the plague of frogs. From my notes, I wrote that God can arm the smallest parts of his creation against us. Here he tries to humble Pharaoh where he couldn't drink or sleep in quiet because they were troubled. They were going to be troubled by these frogs. And this curse is going to pursue him wherever he goes. It's not just like, I'm going into my royal palace and I don't have to see the water. I don't have to see the snakes. No, these frogs were going to be in the palace as well. And it's going to lay heavy with him. Eventually, he's going to be so bothered by this Pharaoh that he's going to make a promise to let the people go. But then his heart is going to get hardened all over again. So let's continue on with verse number 3. And the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into thine house, and into thy bedchamber, and upon thy bed, and into the house of the servants, and upon thy people, and into thine ovens, and into thy kneading troughs. Like you can imagine, like there was frogs like everywhere. Like it was in their ovens. I mean, think about it, in their beds. These are slimy, smelly, slimy frogs everywhere. So even Pharaoh's bed was going to have this. There was no place in Egypt that was safe from the frogs, even in the upper and the lower rooms of the royalty house. So this is what's going to break him. So verse number 4, and the frogs shall come up both on thee and upon thy people and upon all thy servants. And the Lord spake unto Moses, say unto Aaron, stretch forth thine hand with thy rod over the streams, over the rivers, and over the ponds, and cause frogs to come up upon the land of Egypt. And Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. Verse number 7, and the magicians did so with their enchantments, and brought up frogs upon the land of Egypt. Verse number 8, then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, entreat the Lord that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go, that they may do sacrifice unto the Lord. So in verse number 8, he's tasking Moses to pray to the Lord, for him to talk to the Lord, and to tell him to take the frogs away. He was going to go ahead. He was going to let the people go. Verse number 9, and Moses said unto Pharaoh, glory over me, when shall I entreat for thee and for thy servants and for thy people to destroy the frogs from thee and thy house, that they may remain in the river only? And he's asking him, he says, so when should I do this? When are you going to do this? So he's got to have an answer for God and say, okay, I'm going to go before God and I'm going to plead for him, but I've got to know when he's going to do this. So verse number 10 is what his response, and he says, and he said, tomorrow, and he said, be it according to thy word, that thou mayest know that there is none like unto the Lord our God. Verse number 11, and the frogs shall depart from thee and from thy house and from thy servants and from thy people, that they shall remain in the rivers only. Verse number 12, and Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried unto the Lord because of the frogs which he had brought against Pharaoh. Verse number 13, and the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out of the houses, out of the villages, and out of the fields. And they gathered them together upon heaps, and the land stank. So the stink was still there from all the dead frogs that they collected that were around there. But the ones in the river were going to stay in the river. Number 15. But when Pharaoh saw that there was respite, he hardened his heart and hearkened not unto them as the Lord had said. From my notes, I'm reading that Pharaoh hardened his heart in stubborn disobedience, which is self-centered and results in rebellion against God. Verse number 16. And the Lord said unto Moses, say unto Aaron, stretch out thy rod and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. So here is another plague, because Pharaoh, now he didn't do what he promised to do. Now God is doing another plague, which this is now going to be lice. These lice, I wrote from my notes, these were produced out of the dust of the earth and could be from any part of the creation, and to correct those, and it was used to correct those who rebel against him. These lice were troublesome, and they were disgraceful to the Egyptian priests, who were obliged that there were no vermin. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this, because some people say actually that each one of these plagues represent a certain level of corruption within Egypt. So these plagues, I'm reading from our notes, inflicted on the Egyptians had reference to their national crimes and or particularly severe from their wicked customs. The magicians attempted to imitate them, but they could not. They were forced to confess that they had no divine power, and we'll see that coming up. Verse number 17, and they did so, for Aaron stretched out his hand with the rod and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man. So you see, from the dust, he tapped the rod, and the dust came up, and from there became lice. And all the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. That's a lot of lice. Verse number 18, and the magicians did so with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice upon man and upon beast. So it wasn't just the man, it was also the animals as well. Verse number 19, then the magicians said unto Pharaoh. Then listen to this. This is when they're starting to realize this. Then the magicians said unto Pharaoh. So these are the wicked, deceitful magicians turning around to Pharaoh and saying, this is the finger of God. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he hearkened not unto them as the Lord had said. So let's talk about this. The finger of God means this is God's work. They're telling Pharaoh this is God's work. They're like, give it up. But Pharaoh's persistentness and stubbornness was very bad for everybody because it was blinding. He still didn't want to see the truth, even though everybody around him, everybody around him saw the truth. They knew that this is the work of God. How can you turn dust into lice? I mean, look at all of these signs, these wonders that they're seeing. Verse number 20, and the Lord said unto Moses, rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh. We already talked about him telling him, you've got to go and stand before Pharaoh. Stand before Pharaoh. He's got to go and stand in front of he's basically standing in front of his enemy. Remember when the place where he didn't even want to do this, he didn't even think about doing this, now he's actually coming and standing in front of his enemy. Look at the place where God is putting his character now. Lo, he cometh forth to the water, and say unto him, thus saith the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. So again, this was another morning where Pharaoh paid his time, had devotion time to the river. He was still glorifying the river and probably the gods of the river. Listen to this beautiful little bird who's singing over here to me. Verse number 21, else if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people. Else if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thy houses. And the houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground whereon they are. Verse 22, and I will sever in that day the land of Goshen in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, to the end thou mayest know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth. In this particular verse, the Egyptians and the Hebrews were going to be marked in the plague of flies. So as you can see here, Goshen, which is the people, the Hebrews, they were not going to see the swarms and the flies. It was only going to be in the portion of Egypt where the Egyptians were. Verse 23, and I will put a division between my people and thy people tomorrow. Tomorrow shall this sign be. Verse 24, and the Lord did so, and there came a grievous swarm of flies into the house of Pharaoh, and into his servants' houses, and into all the land of Egypt. The land was corrupted by reason of the swarm of flies. Oh, look how windy it is now. 25, and Pharaoh called for Moses and for Aaron, and said, go ye, sacrifice to your God in the land. Pharaoh wanted a compromise that he would let the people go as long as it was nearby without leaving Egypt. But God's ways were that they had to leave Egypt. Pharaoh was willing into a treaty with Moses and Aaron. He was content that they could sacrifice to their God, provided that they didn't leave the land of Egypt. But that would be an abomination to God if they offered Egyptian sacrifices. It would be an abomination to the Egyptians that they offered to God the objects of the worship of the Egyptians. Pharaoh was told not to deal deceitfully with God anymore, and they were going to be marked because they weren't going to cheat God with fake repentance and a false surrender of themselves. God was not going to stand for this deceit that they were playing these games with him. Verse 26, and Moses said, it is not meet so to do, for we shall sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians to the Lord our God. Lo, shall we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, and will they not stone us? So if you remember back in the chapter of Joseph, we learned about how God didn't want the family of Joseph to be inside of Egypt. So because they had to do their sacrifices. But if they were in Egypt and they sacrificed in Egypt, they would be stoned. So that's why they were outside of Egypt in the land of Goshen. That's why the tribes eventually multiplied there. So they couldn't now go into Egypt and sacrifice to their God there. I mean, this was an abomination, and God wouldn't have wanted it that way. And this is what Moses is asking them. Will not they stone us? Verse 27, we will go 3 days journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he shall command us. Verse 28, and Pharaoh said, I will let you go, that ye may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness. Only ye shall not go very far away. Entreat for me. Verse 29, and Moses said, behold, I go out from thee, and I will entreat the Lord, that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. But let not Pharaoh deal deceitfully anymore in not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So he's being really tough at this point with Pharaoh, because now they know what Pharaoh has done in the past. He has said the same thing, and then he has acted very deceitfully. Verse number 30, and Moses went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. Verse 31, and the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and he removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. There remained not one. Verse 32, and Pharaoh hardened his heart at this time. Also neither would he let the people go. So here he is again doing the same thing, acting deceitfully. And we're going to leave it at that, because I'm learning a lot about filming outdoors today. So this video is going to take me a little bit longer to edit. So I'm going to let that go, especially because I want to make sure that right before around the Passover, we are actually reading into that area. So I don't want to go too much ahead of myself. This is going to be a long video this week as well, but I do want to read my notes. Remember that in today's lesson, we are called to be God's spokesman. I want to forget about this. It's very important. I wrote this in my notes. We are called to be God's spokesmen or spokeswomen into the world, just like Moses, and that we may feel like we're tongue-tied and inadequate for the task. But the word of God is like Moses' staff, which has the power to deliver people from bondage and reclaim all of his promises to show people to follow him. And also, I wrote in my notes that I want you to remember that there are even in today, there's a lot of false magicians in today's world. There are people who give good feel type gospel, but they don't confront the sin in the gospel. They just talk a lot about feeling and feeling good and this and that, but they never talk about the sin. Well, we have to talk about it, because that's the only way that you're going to come to peace. And we also have to take hold of Jesus on the cross. So we have to be the spokespeople for God. And I'm not saying that you have to go out, but whenever you can, you need to talk to people about God. It's not going to be a popular message with some people, but it's the one where we must be obedient and faithful to God, and to be able to proclaim it to those that we believe that God is calling us to proclaim it to. So that is the whole message of the Bible. That is what God wants for us. You don't have to have a ministry. You don't have to write 100 books. You don't have to do a Bible study. You don't have to do these things, but every once in a while, when you meet somebody who you feel deserves to know about Jesus Christ, and you should do it. You should do it, and you will see how eventually you won't be scared of doing it anymore. You're going to be like Moses. In the beginning, he didn't want to be a preacher. That's basically what he is. He is basically like a preacher and a leader. And in the beginning, he said no. He didn't want to answer the call. He didn't want to do it. And God said, yes, you are. And he actually did it. And now look where he's at. He's coming and standing in front of the most powerful men of the world, because he has stood in front of the most powerful presence of the universe. So now he has the power to stand in front of his biggest obstacles. And they're not obstacles for him anymore, because he knows that God is with him. And that's what you have to realize in this chapter of Exodus, that if God is calling you to do something, then you have the power of God with you. And with that, that's really all you need. Even as scary as it seems, go to God, and ask him to help you and walk you through it step by step, just like he's walking me. I'm learning today how to film outdoors for my Bible study, so we will see how that goes in the future, but I'm learning a lot. And if you like these Bible studies, please give me a thumbs up. It really helps me a lot to get the word out, as many people as I can, to watch and learn a little bit about the Bible. It only takes 30 to 40 minutes a week where you dedicate to learning, and I do all the work for you. I do a lot of researching, so you get a little bit more information. And we're also in the King James, which is the book that most people don't want to read. But what helps too is you don't have to have a King James Bible if you don't own one. You can actually just get an app that you can switch from NIV, NLT. There's a lot of apps out there that are free that you can do that with, and you can follow along when I'm reading in the King James, but have your New Living Translation beside you, so if there's something that you need to go back and read there, you have that translation as well. So that's the way that I think works the best. So you don't have to go out and buy a whole nother Bible if you don't want to. If you already have one, just get an app that gives you the translation, and you just follow along with your app on your tablet or something like that, and then you have your Bible nearby to take some notes. So I thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this day being outdoors here. I'm not sure if the cows were back there, but they were out there this morning. So I hope you enjoyed this time that we had out in nature, and I hope that you come back next week for my Bible study. Stay tuned for this week. We are not going to be doing a Bible verse on Wednesday. We are going to actually get into the armor of God that I promised you we were going to get into. So we're going to start with that for the next couple of weeks, and then we're eventually going to start moving into the New Testament as well during the week. So and I also have a special for you during the week of Easter. We're not going to do a Bible study because I know a lot of people are going to be traveling and being with family on that day. So on that day, I'm going to be posting my notes, and I'm going to be talking to you about the book of Enoch and why it's important to read that book. So that's going to post on that weekend, that Sunday, and you don't have to watch it that week. You could just come back to it during the week. So with that said, I thank you for watching today. Have a lovely rest of the week, and I'll see you back next week. Also, if you need prayer requests, please leave it down below, because I love praying for you. And have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.